You might have to move the microphone closer to the computer speaker for the sound to come through.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Community Church. Let's get together and feel all right, is what I say. One love. Wish you a happy Martin Luther King weekend. And welcome you on this Sunday, January 17th. We have a wonderful program this morning. We have Jeff Perry, and to start with, the joy of my life at Community Church is to be able to find and bring to you incredible musicians who sing about love and justice. And we have done that this morning with our friend from Western Mass. He has joined us several times, and we love his uplifting hip-hop vibe every time he's here. Tim Blessed, welcome to our humble Zoom. And take it away with the song. We're so glad you're with us again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Unmute.
Honored to be here. Can you hear me? Check, 1, 2.
Unmute.
I am unmuted on my end. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Lovely. It's good to be here, y'all. It's unthinkable to think where we're at today. Toxic leadership, global pandemic, social unrest. The song is dedicated to all you. MLK, yo. They say support the troops, we say support our youth. Martin King against the war, support the truth. Martin King against oppression, now I'm speaking to you. Follow the tree to the roots, Putin and Trump in cahoots. Spit it the truth, good for the gander and goose. For the oil they shoot, for the loot they pollute. Dr. King sacrificed so you could do what you do. So we must rise, unified from the 3 to the 2 to the 1 love, 1 glove, 5 fingers, clutch fist. 1 dove flies over hate, dropping enough ish, we insist. Dr. King removed this cancerous cyst. Panthers for the kids, teach them to love and to give. A father's hug, a mother's kiss, that's the wish that we live. Poor people's movement, we choose it so that the poor can be rich. Put down your guns and sticks, with words we uplift. Corrupt governments, we flip with our righteous wit. Use of metaphysics, ancient intelligence, they wish to silence us with violence. Our souls is a gift. And if I die tonight, don't stress this. I did it for the kids. Dr. King did it for our grandkids, kids. Everybody put your ones up. Put your ones up. Put your ones up for 1 love. Everybody put your ones up. Put your ones up. Put your ones up. Listen. Walking through the valley of death, I see I'm blessed. Everyone's healthy, give thanks, deep breath. Pops died in 19 in retrospect, plus 1 aunt, 2 uncles' funeral home. Stress, heavy on my chest. Family squatting up like soldiers clawing through the mess. Lockdowns on my ass. Sick capitalists, 99% got less. Toxic leadership might invest. I got inner visions as they causing divisions and contradictions. We keep it flowing, they causing collisions. We lockstep, always on a mission. We constantly for the people, that's the vision. 2020 Mandalorian, I'm spitting poison at my ops in my DeLorean. 1.21 gigawatts, black to the future. 7 billion humans march. This our time, 2021. Watch, quarantine, COVID-19, bad dream, vaccine, rage against the machine, microchip in my veins, I intervene, not today, not tomorrow, seen. Peace, y'all. Thank you so much for having me.
Ten blessed.
Yes, I.
All right, all right. Oh, I just knocked a microphone and a stand over, but that's okay. I will proceed with what I want to do here, which is light this candle while I say, "There is no freedom," a wise man said. "Let justice roll down, roll down. When the poor cry out for shelter and bread, let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we will make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hatred will never drive out hate. Let love roll down, roll down. Remember, our hearts can make us great. Let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in a dream. When the way gets rough, we will make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream." That's a song by my friend Aileen Vance, Santa Cruz, California, and I recently heard a new version of it. I recorded that song 15 years ago on a record called At Last, and there's a new version of it. I just heard it. Her name is B. Morris, the new performer, and I heard it and I said, "B, do you want to sing at Community Church?" And we got a new friend. She's a young African-American woman. She'll be joining us on February 24th, I believe it is. Just stay in tune with Community Church on Sunday mornings, and you're going to have, especially during this quarantine time, variety of music from all over the place, just great music. We've already had a bunch of great people from all over the planet. Friends joined us from Switzerland, from California, from down south, from upstate New York, and from Western Mass. So there's our candle. We light it for unity, for strength, and for remembering Dr. King and the example that he set for all of us, especially in this moment of division and trouble. We call his name for love and inspiration for a future, the short-term and the long-term future. I want to tell you folks about a couple of things coming up here at the church. Next week, we have a really great thing. We had a minister at Community Church for 39 years. His name was Donald Lothrop. And the archives of this church, which we've really been able to take out of storage and out of mothballs in the last couple of years and spread them all out over our 5th floor, which we can't use because it needs a bunch of work. And look at these archives and realize that this was a bigger than life personage in this church during its amazing years of success, being the biggest church in Boston, meeting at Symphony Hall and at Jordan Hall. Next Sunday, we will be looking at Donald Trump and talking about him. I will be joined by David Carl Olson, who was our minister here for about 8 years. David will be here, and we'll be joined by video by Carla Lothrop White, who is Donald's daughter. she's 84 years old and completely on the ball. And we're during the course of this coming week, we're going to record an oral history with Carla about her childhood memories of this church as she was coming up, and this church was in its years of both phenomenal success as well as incredible controversy and blacklisting and all kinds of trouble over the years. So it's going to be really interesting. And to top it off, we're going to listen to Donald's last sermon that he gave in 1993. He was already retired, but we have from digging in the archives a cassette of that day here at the church. So join us next Sunday for that look at the life and ministry of Reverend Donald Lothrop. We have a bunch of other wonderful upcoming events. I'll point to one that I'm really excited about. Her name is Margaret Kimberly. She is the historian and one of the moving forces behind Black Agenda Report. And she will join us. The date is February 24th, and that is our annual W.E.B. Du Bois address, which we do every year. Du Bois, if you don't know about this, spoke at Community Church many times during the 30s, 40s, all the way to 1959. He gave his final address here soon before he moved to Ghana. We actually found a reel-to-reel of Du Bois's address here in 1959. We have digitized it, and we will play an excerpt of it on that day, February 24th. And we will eventually digitize it and put it up on our YouTube channel so anybody can access it, and also send it to his archives, which are, we were just talking about this, Jeff and I, housed at U-Mass Amherst. That's a few things. Let me tell you also about a Wednesday upcoming. You can find out all of these things on our website or our Facebook page. Not this next Wednesday, but the one after that, we have a young filmmaker named Cray Novick, graduated 2016 from Hampshire College, has spent considerable amount of time in the last 4 years in Cuba. And he has put together some documentary footage, some of which was played recently on PBS. And we will show some of that, as well as have Cray Novick, the filmmaker, with us on that day. It's Charlie, what's February 20-something? Quick look at my calendar and tell you February 28th. I'm sorry, January. We're in January. Getting ahead of myself. January 28th, Cray Novick. So enough about Community Church, and we're just really excited about doing these broadcasts, and we will continue these broadcasts after we are able, thank goodness, to meet again together here in this lonely auditorium, which is saying, "Where are my people? I want them back." Tim Blessed, will you bless us with another song before we get to hear a whole bunch from Jeff Perry? We're kind of cutting our church stuff short because we're just so excited about today's talk. Go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
Love to. Thank you so much. For those that don't know, several years ago, I survived a police attack. And, I really thought about how, love is really the ultimate power, the most powerful force in the universe, really. At the opposite spectrum, there is fear and hate. And when I was thinking about what had happened to me and why that police officer attacked me, I was wondering, are you afraid of my skin or what's within? Because be honest, live in sunlight, this melanin is a millennium of intelligent gentlemen Godlike, the opposite of Zimmerman, strong like Trayvon Martin. We can't fight, we stand our ground till it's all right. But this long night, it never seems to end. Although we speak to make you understand, we bend, we compromise. But what about our black lives? Did Michael Brown really need to die over some cigaritos? Where are the superheroes? Over Lucy's? Where are the Bruce Lees? When I was younger, I thought my heroes were the cops until I got stopped and then I got dropped. So then my heroes became the Black Panthers. Lack of justice turns to black anger. The system will strangle you. I can't breathe. Oh, say, can you see? George Floyd couldn't breathe. So we all saw the videotape. There's no debate. Broken system I hate wants me to wait. Sorry, Charlie, but my patience is long gone. Plus, I'm way too black and way too strong. And we got white allies by our side. Take out police brutality like apartheid. In this long walk, we march with Mandela, Dr. King and Selma through the Mississippi Delta. We march with Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, march with Rosa Parks. I see freedom coming. March with Frederick Douglass, Garvey and Carney. With my ancestors behind me, they can't harm me. Not the National Guard, nor the Army. March non-violently, cloaked by the words of Gandhi. Break these chains of racism, emancipated, I'm the master. Cause black lives matter. Break these chains of racism, emancipated, I'm the master. Cause black lives matter. See, they beat us, they choke us, stomp us with their boots. Hands up, don't shoot. They tase us, they shoot us, stomp us with their boots. Hands up, don't shoot. They beat us, they choke us, stomp us with their boots. Hands up, don't shoot. They tase us, they shoot us, stomp us with their boots. Hands up, don't shoot, don't shoot. Don't shoot, don't shoot. Don't shoot, don't shoot, shoot, shoot. Don't shoot, don't shoot, shoot, shoot. Don't shoot, don't shoot. Don't shoot, don't shoot. Don't shoot, don't shoot, 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 shoot. Don't shoot, 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 don't shoot. Dedicated in the memory to many of those that daily getting oppressed, getting pulled over, getting shot by the police until all are free. One love. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Tim, thank you. I went running to look for a beautiful poster that was made by our gem of a publications manager, and it's called Say Their Names, and it has a drawing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and then it has the list, a huge list. You know, it's a beautiful poster. I'll send you one as soon as I can find it. So I wanted to show folks this little piece of postcard that is designed by my friend Bennett Hammond, also a musician here at Community Church, with his wife Lorraine Hammond. One more time, if you want a few of these, I'd be glad to send them to you. I'm sending them out as thank you cards for the mess of contributions that have come in lately in response to our last newsletter appeal. And I'll talk about that more later. But Tim, I hope I remember to ask you to tell us more in your next song about your association with Dream Corps and Love Army. Yep. And Van Jones. I'm sure people would love to hear a whole bunch about that. So thank you, Tim. That's beautiful. And right on. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jeff Perry to you. Jeff, we're so glad you're back here with us. It's really a treat. It's been 2 or 3 years. You came to us especially on the on the heating of Carla Rabb of blessed memory. She has since passed, and we remember her fondly, especially because she alerted us to you and your work and your inspiration to us. So, Jeff, I'm not going to introduce you any further than that. Just give you the floor and take it away with whatever amount of time you want or need. When it gets about 3 hours, I'll. I'm just kidding.
Couldn't get that long. Thank you, Dean. Wonderful time to be with you on this show. And I see some of the people who are watching who I know, and I'm very pleased to see their faces again. And thank you. I think this is my third or fourth time now with you folks. And today the purpose is to talk about the new volume that just was published on Hubert Harrison. And this volume, forgive me, I don't have the technology fully under my command yet, but this new book, if you can read it, is Hubert Harrison, The Struggle for Equality, 1918 to 1927. I'm going to come back to this in a second. And it follows volume 1 of the biography of Hubert Harrison, which is Hubert Harrison, the father of Harlem Radicalism, 1883 to 1918. Now, this cover is taken at a 1918 Liberty Congress meeting in Washington, D.C. And although you can't see it in the cover picture, in the picture inside, right next to Harrison is William Monroe Trotter of Boston, right? And this was the major Black protest meeting during World War I, and they had people from men and women from 35 states come and attend, over 100 people. This picture, and the full picture is inside the book, is Harrison teaching World Problems of Race in 1926 on 135th Street. And some of the outstanding people in the larger photo are Richard B. Moore, who's from Barbados, was with the African Blood Brotherhood, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, ran a major bookstore in Harlem, and whose daughter, Joyce Moore Turner, I still stay in touch with, and she's now 100 years old. And in August of 2020, she had published in the Journal of Caribbean History a major article on a peer-reviewed article on Ethelred Brown, who has some of his papers placed up in Boston at the Unitarian Universalist Ministry. And Brown started a Hubert Harrison Memorial Church after Harrison's death. But also in this photo, the larger photo, is W.A. Domingo, a longtime activist and first editor of Garvey's Negro World, Williana Jones Burroughs, who was active particularly with the communists and went to the Soviet Union for a period, and Hermie Weiswood, who also was active with the communists later on. And there's about 70 people in here. I haven't been able to identify them all, but a lot of the outstanding Harlem activists would come to Harrison's activities. Now, this volume, the new volume, covers from 1918 to 27. It's the last 9.5 years of Harrison's life. And it is based on extensive use of the Hubert H. Harrison papers, which I preserved and inventoried from the early 1980s until I placed them with the family's permission in 2005 at Columbia University. The family got all the money, just so people are clear, they got all the money, and it was a large sum. And Columbia made a commitment to putting some items online. And finally, I say finally, but I'm very happy about it. Last year, they threw up about 1,300 Harrison items on their rare book and manuscript library webpage. And included in those 1,300 items is Hubert Harrison's complete diary, which is a major document people want to read. It's over 200 pages. And it really gives his inside look at himself and the events around him and the people he's interacting with. Now, this just completed 2-volume biography is, I believe, the first full-length multi-volume biography of an Afro-Caribbean, and only the 4th of an African-American after those of Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Langston Hughes. So Harrison really is a giant of Black history, but he was long ignored for many years. And that's why I'm glad this is now the third time you folks have hosted him. But just a little background for those who might not be familiar with him, and then I want to get into what's in volume 2. Harrison was born in St. Croix, Virgin Islands. His mother was a Barbadian immigrant, and his father had been born enslaved, a Crucian born enslaved. And he came to New York in 1900, and soon thereafter moved up to Harlem, the most dense block in Harlem. And he lived in Harlem the remainder of his life from 1907 to 1927. So he's Harlem based. And he was a brilliant, autodidactic, working class, race and class conscious writer, orator, editor, educator, book reviewer, working class, race and class conscious activist, and a radical internationalist. And this is all documented pretty thoroughly in the book. The historian Joel A. Rogers in World's Great Men of Color described him as perhaps the foremost Afro-American intellect of his time. A. Philip Randolph refers to him as the father of Harlem Radicalism. Richard B. Moore, who I mentioned before, describes him as an outstanding radical internationalist and one who never lost sight of the interest of the African peoples worldwide. And that's just broad stroke overview. Now, in these 2 volumes, I think it becomes clear. And what I do in these 2 volumes is I let Harrison speak for himself as much as I can. He's very articulate, right? And Harrison played, just in volume 1, I describe how, or I elaborate, quoting from Harrison and drawing from his work, how he played signal roles, leading roles in the largest class radical movement, socialism, and the largest race radical movement, the New Negro / Garvey movement of his era. He was a major radical influence on the class radical Randolph and on the race radical Garvey. And from these roots, of course, we later see Randolph marching on Washington with MLK, and we see Malcolm's father as a Garveyite activist and his mother as a reporter for the Negro World, the same Garvey paper, which Harrison edited before she started working on it. So I've kind of argued in the books that he is considered the most class conscious of the race radicals and the most race conscious of the class radicals in those years. And he's a key link in the 2 great strands of the civil rights Black liberation struggle. During the 1910s and 20s, he was either the head or creator or among the founders of almost every important development originating in Negro Harlem, from the Negro manhood movement to political representation in public office, from collecting Negro books to speaking on the streets, from demanding federal control over lynching to agitation for Negroes on the police force. He was a key figure in struggles against white supremacy and for political and economic equality, true democracy, and international colored unity. Volume 1 details how from 1911 to 14, he was also a pioneer Black activist in the free thought and birth control movements. And while in the Socialist Party, was a major theoretician, speaker, and activist. He maintained, and he had some important insights, very, very insightful, very brief. I'll summarize them. He maintained that politically, the Negro is the touchstone of the modern democratic idea. The presence of the Negro puts our democracy to the test. And that's a great statement, I think, because, and reveals the falsity of it. And then he goes on to say, and true democracy and equality implies a revolution startling to even think of. Now, for people not familiar with the touchstone concept, I had to look it up when I first came across it. And a touchstone is a black stone, and you put the metal against the touchstone to see if it's really the gold that it's purported to be. And the metaphor is wonderful for dealing with social issues. Take any issue: housing, unemployment, healthcare. Pick an issue, see how are Black people faring, and what are we going to do about it. It's very insightful and really gets to the nub of a lot of what Harrison did. And if we really deal with that, implies a revolution. Starting to think of is a concept we see in Harrison, and we also see in Theodore W. Allen, the other person I write about, who was kind of a mentor to me, who pioneered his white skin privilege analysis in the mid 1960s, but it was a class-based analysis, not what people may be familiar with now, with the invisible knapsack and all of that. And he most significantly wrote The Invention of the White Race, 2 volumes in 1990s for Verso, which I re-edited with notes in 2012 for Verso Books. And it's the concept that white supremacy is the key that holds the system, the social control of the system in place. It's what the ruling class relies on when push comes to shove. And Allen details how in 3 major periods of crisis, that's exactly what they did. When in post-Reconstruction, populism, and the period of the 1930s, they turned to white supremacy to help beat back the movement from below. And so it's what holds the system in place, but it's also clear that if we can beat them on that issue, a lot of their system of control can fall apart and we can really make significant progress. So Harrison offered that insight, and he offered a few other things, but two things that appealed to me about Harrison and his writings in the early period is he argued that racism is not innate, which is something I think very important, as we struggle today. And that's in Allen also. He thinks it's something that is, reinforced, it's taught and reinforced both ideologically, but with these privileges, which he argues very importantly, that the privileges are not really in the interest of the laboring class European Americans. What's in their interest is solidarity with their Black and Latin and Asian co-workers, et cetera, right? That's what's really in their interest. And we kind of see that today, where the gap is at record proportions, the gap between rich and poor, and it's got to be changed, and people got to start moving in that direction, I think. But what happened, he also, with the socialist, one last thing I just want to point out, he also asserted that the mission of the Socialist Party is to free the working class from exploitation, and the duty of the party to champion the Negro's cause is as clear as day. This is the crucial test of socialism's sincerity. And he said that a year before Du Bois wrote similar things and started picking up that issue in that form. Socialist Party statements and practices, however, which are documented in Volume 1, caused him to leave the party in 1914. And after departing, Hubert Harrison offered what I think is arguably the most profound but least heeded criticism in the history of the United States left, that Socialist Party leaders, like organized labor leaders, put the white race first before class. They put race first before class. Now, this is what Harrison summarized. And as a socialist, he spoke before 50,000 people at Union Square. He spoke 23 times a week during Eugene Debs's campaign in 1912. He went down to Broad and Wall Street in 1912, and starting at 1 o'clock, spoke for 3 hours until the Wall Street bells rang and the market closed, on socialism for an audience that reached as far as the voice could reach. This is what I refer to as an early Occupy Wall Street. He also he wrote 5 major theoretical articles in the socialist press, which were the first major theoretical articles by a Black person in the socialist press. He wrote on a Negro and socialism. So, but he left the Socialist Party over white supremacy, and then he had to try and figure out what to do, because back in 1911, now Harrison came, he had no college education. He did come, he was an orphan when he got here, and he worked 5 days a week, and he also worked a couple of nights, but he went to high school in the evening. And in 1903, one of the New York dailies wrote an article, "Genius Found in West Indian Pupil." They'd never seen anybody quite like him, because he was getting citywide honors, but barely had time to go to school. He was brilliant. And he, picked up odd jobs until about 1907, when he got a job in the Postal Service. It was the Post Office Department back then. I mention that because it puts a smile on my face also, because I worked 32 years as a postal activist from 74 to 2007. And Theodore W. Allen, my friend who I write about, who was a former coal miner in his early years till he hurt his back in the mines, later worked in the post office. So, you see a lot, you learn a lot when you work in the post office. And but Harrison was summarily fired from the post office in 1911 because Booker T. Washington, who at that time was the most powerful Black man in America, had gone to England and Europe and uttered some statements about conditions being basically fine for Black people back home. And Du Bois put together a petition with 50 prominent people protesting Washington's statement. And Harrison, a night shift working postal worker, wrote 2 letters to a New York daily, and he basically argued, Booker T, you're free to say what you want, but you should tell the truth. And shortly thereafter, Booker T. Washington and his right hand, Emmett Scott, this is part of what they used to call the Tuskegee machine, swung into action. They contacted Edmund Morgan, who was the postmaster of New York, and who to this day, the largest postal building in New York is still named after. And they had Harrison summarily fired. I knew how to get his postal records, and some years ago, I wrote out to St. Louis, and I got his records, and Harrison had a clean postal record before he was summarily fired. So he gets fired in 1911, and by this time, he's a wife with 2 children. He winds up having 5 children, and he's thrust into poverty for the remainder of his life. He lives basically at the edge of poverty. But he starts working later in 1911 with the Socialist Party. And then after he breaks from the Socialist Party in 1914, for a while, he starts working with the Free Thought movement and with some of the anarchists. But he's moving increasingly towards concentrated work in the African-American community, which he is stimulated to do by his own experiences and by some comments from people he knew, including a librarian at the 135th Street Library named Esther Cohn, and including comments from James Weldon Johnson. They said, look, you really should put your services here. And in 1916-17, he founds the first organization and the first newspaper of the militant New Negro movement. The newspaper is The Voice, and the organization is the Liberty League. And please note that this is in 1917. This is 8 years before Alain Locke comes out with his book, The New Negro, right? And which I have over there, which I can refer to in a second. And much attention over the recent years has been on Alain Locke and the New Negro, but Locke's New Negro publication was largely a literary publication. And all of Harrison's writings were both political and literary, as I'll go into. So an extraordinary advance was this work that Harrison was doing. And even when he founds the Liberty League, Boston intervenes again, because the day after his founding meeting in Harlem, he shoots up to Boston to speak at Faneuil, is the pronunciation okay? Faneuil Hall. And he before a large crowd, and he would come to Boston at various times to speak to people and to work particularly with Trotter on certain projects. And he, he's active with his voice and the Liberty League throughout most of 1917. But Harrison's always independent. And one theme that I paid attention to in the book, and you'll see many, many little notes on, is I found it very interesting to see how activists were funded. Still a question today we have to ask ourselves, I think. Where did they get their money? How did they keep going? And in Harrison's case, he was reportedly offered $10,000, which was an incredibly large sum of money, in 1917 by a white patron, and he turned it down, even though he was living in poverty, because he didn't want them to call the shots. He wanted to do his own thing. And it's very different, say, than Booker T. Washington, than Du Bois, and Garvey had other means of raising his money, and I go into these things. So Harrison's voice struggles along, and in 1918, however, he and Trotter convened this Liberty Congress, which was the major protest effort during World War I. And during that Liberty Congress and leading up to it, NAACP leaders, particularly Joel Spingarn, who was the head of the NAACP, but Spingarn was also a major in military intelligence. And for people who are not aware of it, to this day, the NAACP awards their offers an award, puts forth an award for outstanding achievement by a Black American each year in his name, the Spingarn Medal. Now, Spingarn was a major in military intelligence, which was that group that monitored the Black and the radical community. He was also, by W.E.B. Du Bois's own words, a very close friend of Du Bois. He would help him out with funds, and he helped him, Du Bois was editor of the Crisis while Spingarn headed the NAACP. And Du Bois in that period, and I'm not saying that Spingarn pushed him to this, Du Bois, I believe, probably made his own decision, put in an application for a captaincy in military intelligence. A lot of people don't know this. And military intelligence, again, that branch of the military that monitored the Black and the radical community. And in so doing, it seems, in order to help him get the position, he wrote an editorial in the Crisis magazine. That's the journal that he edited. And the essence, it was only one paragraph long, one of his essays, and it said, "While this war lasts, let us forget our special grievances and close ranks behind Woodrow Wilson's war efforts." Now, Harrison knew right away what special grievances were because Du Bois had defined them a couple of months earlier, and everybody knew they were lynching, segregation, and disfranchisement. And Harrison, again, took the position, well, Du Bois, you're free to say what you want, but we can disagree on the war, right? But you don't have to go there. You don't have to do that. And he criticized Du Bois openly in The Voice. Du Bois basically never spoke to Harrison for the remainder of his life. But Harrison's critique was picked up by many others in the African-American community and other publications. And years later, according to Herbert Aptheker, who chronicled much of Du Bois's life and helped place the papers up at U-Mass Amherst, Aptheker has a kind of a little note. He doesn't emphasize it at all, but he says that years later, Du Bois recognized that Harrison's critics during World War I were accurate, that what they were saying was right. So that's where volume 1 ends and volume 2 picks up. And volume 2 is the last 9.5 years of Harrison's life, but it's an extraordinary period full of many important things. And that volume 2, volume 1, I think I said 640 pages. Volume 2 is 1,000 pages, right? So it's not going to be followed. It's not going to be read in one sitting, I don't think. But in volume 2, and I'm just going here to just give an overview a little bit. Volume 2, The Struggle for Equality, 1918 to 27, details the extraordinary last 9.5 years of Harrison's life, which were lived at the edge of poverty in a United States shaped by capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy. Harrison had been a leader in struggle against those forces, but he had found that the left and labor movement put the white race first before class. In that context, he deemed it a priority to work at developing an enlightened race consciousness, racial solidarity, and radical internationalism among Black people, especially the, quote, common people, in struggles for political equality and true democracy against white supremacy and for radical social change. The second volume is presented in roughly chronological order. It begins with Harrison returns after the Liberty Congress. Part 1 covers Harrison's pioneering, seminal, and long ignored writings, particularly in The Voice, which he carried on until 1919, and The New Negro, which was a publication he edited in 1919. The New Negro was subtitled The New Negro, a journal of the international consciousness of the darker races. But again, listen to the title, New Negro. This is 6 years before Alain Locke. And work that gave direction to, these were important documents that gave work, or they produced important documents that gave direction to the militant New Negro movement that he had founded. Part 2 of this volume covers 1920 to 1922 and details Harrison's outstanding contributions and impact as a writer with Garvey. He became the principal editor of Marcus Garvey's Negro World in January 1920, when the paper swept the globe. Harrison was a brilliant editor, and he knew how to, he describes in his diary all the transformative steps he took to shape the paper, to cut down on the long titles, to identify authors. He started, over a period of time, he started book review sections, poetry for the people, West Indian news notes. He brought in wonderful people like Claude McKay and Arthur Schomburg and others, Lucian Watkins, who was trying to publish up in the Boston area, a poet, others to write for the Negro World. Outstanding segment in the history of Black journalism. So, but this second section, part 2 of this volume, also discusses his important differences with Marcus Garvey. And this is the first time, I believe, that much of this stuff is going to be brought forth in depth and detail. And it's drawn very much from his diary and his some of his written works, and also from documents that are available, because there's a lot of the history that is out there that people are unaware of. He also, his literary work in this period, his book reviews and theater reviews, again, contributed significantly to the climate leading up to Alain Locke's influential publication, The New Negro. Part 3, these have chapters in them, each one of these parts, focuses on Harrison's prolific and wide-ranging writing and speaking efforts as an independent freelance educator. That freelance educator phrase is taken from J.A. Rogers in his profile of Harrison, World Great Men of Color. But Harrison was a pioneering soapbox orator. He was considered to be an unrivaled soapbox orator. But he also lectured indoors and outdoors, particularly as the weather got colder. He would lecture indoors. He had series of lectures over the years. I think a pioneering lecturer for the New York City Board of Education for 4 years in their night classes. That's a lot of times African Americans, the chance they would have to go get a little education would be after work in the evening, and they'd have these adult classes. But he would come up to Boston. He spoke on several trips up in Boston and Haverhill and places up here, New Bedford, I believe he went out to. And he would speak. He'd go to Washington, to Virginia. He'd go to the Midwest, Philadelphia, and again, speaking, drawing large crowds, attracting much attention. So he would be a prolific writer and speaker. I've located I think I've located about 500 or 600 articles he wrote over his short life, which is extraordinary, or articles or pieces. And I've identified maybe 500 talks that he gave. Now, sometimes I have little tidbits from the talks. Other times I just have them listed by topic, from his schedule of events or flyers that were put out. And I don't have more than that at this time on this stuff. But I haven't given up hope, because Harrison did deliver 3 talks. Harrison was a master of the 2 main means of mass outreach in his day, and that was public speaking and journalism. He was great at both. And he did speak 3 times on the radio in New York. This is when radio recordings were really in their innovative stages. And I've got the dates and the times and the subjects, but I believe they're all at the Edison Library in New Jersey. And there's still, when I last checked, there were 1 million uncategorized, unidentified items there. So I haven't given up hope. And also I have a friend from St. Croix who says he believes he has seen 1 video clip of Harrison, but I've not found that one yet. So the search continues. But also what he did in the 3rd stage of this book is he wrote a column from January to June 1924 in the Boston Chronicle. And this was a newspaper that started, I believe, in 1915. And they gave Harrison free rein to write what he wanted. And he wrote weekly columns, a whole, on whatever he chose, but he wrote some fascinating ones on race consciousness, race unity. I've got some of the other topics here. On the International Colored Unity League. Let me see if I can find the other ones quick. I wrote them down. But read, just topics that he tried to put out his message aimed again towards the masses of people. And twice in that period from January to June, he came up to Boston and delivered some talks. And once he spoke on, one of his main talks was on Lincoln and liberty. And first, his main talk, one of his first main talks was on Frederick Douglass. And he argued that, if you compare Douglass and Lincoln, he would argue Douglass was greater because he had further to come in his life, being born enslaved and stuff. But he considered them both very significant in their lives. But the second series of talks he did are very profound, and I encourage people to read them. And they're on Lincoln and liberty. And he takes a close, detailed look at Lincoln and points out things that most people are not familiar with about positions Lincoln took prior to and during the Civil War. And, Lincoln was doing what he thought was best, but Harrison points them out and has issues with them. And I again encourage people to read these, because some years ago, now it's probably over 25 years, Lerone Bennett Jr., who's former editor of Ebony magazine, did a book on Lincoln. And he, unfortunately, because I spoke to him about it after his book came out, he didn't know about Harrison's writings, but he picked up on a lot of the same insights that Harrison had when he did a book on Lincoln. And even more recently, Eric Foner picks up, again, not citing Harrison at all, but picks up on some of these themes. But Harrison really hits on themes which would be educational, because Harrison's always trying to enlighten people. So that's the 3rd section. And then finally, the 4th section of the volume examines Harrison's innovative and more broadly unitary efforts in his last years, including the founding of his organization, the International Colored Unity League, and his organization, the Voice of the Negro, and his lectures on world problems of race, etc. Those documents, again, are very insightful. The International Colored Unity League put forth programs for cooperatives, collective action. It also even proposed the possibility of a state or states for Negroes in the US. And this is 3 years before the Communist Party put forth a similar proposal. It wasn't to be exclusive. I mean, it wouldn't keep people out or anything like that, but where they would have some control. And as I'm looking at my notes right here, one thing I do want to mention, earlier in 1920, when Harrison's writing for the Negro World, he also edits a book called When Africa Awakes, the inside story of the stirrings and strivings of the new Negro in the Western world. And that book has 53 articles, basically on the new Negro movement. 1920, again, that's 5 years before Alain Locke, because I want to come back to that again. So while telling the important story of Harrison's life, this volume seeks to deepen the growing appreciation of Harrison and his work, drawing from his writings, talks, diary, scrapbooks. I can show a photo of some of his scrapbooks later, this is how he kept his files. He would paste newspaper articles in journal publications and then organize them and stuff. There were no digital files back then, but he was very organized. His correspondence and other primary and secondary source materials. It offers important insights on the period in which he lived, on prominent contemporaries and other key figures, and on a wide array of political and literary subjects. His most personally revealing document is his diary. While he wrote his diary for himself, there is no doubt from its content and occasional marginal comments that it was also written for those who would come after him to read and learn from. He was aware of the importance of the work he undertook, and he thought it important that a more complete record of his thinking and actions, as well as the period in which he lived, be recorded. To quote Harrison, "As it comes, so must it be set down." This biography, my biography, reinforcing the importance and value of Harrison's approach, and an effort to allow him to speak to current and future audiences, often cites his diary, papers, writings, and talks. In its approach, this biography also draws insights from comments by 3 of Harrison's contemporaries, Eugene O'Neill, J.A. Rogers, and Arthur Schomburg. O'Neill, a future prize winner in literature, wrote to Harrison that the only propaganda that ever strikes home is the truth about the human soul, black or white. Intentional uplift never amounts to a damn, especially as uplift. To portray a human being, that is all that counts. In a somewhat similar vein, the historian Rogers offered, Harrison was not without his faults. No man is a hero to his valet. In Harrison's case, however, Rogers emphasizes, this is no reason to deny his essential greatness. And finally, for now, at Harrison's funeral, a massive funeral of several thousand people, because he was very well liked and appreciated in Harlem and elsewhere while he was alive. At his funeral, there were a host of speakers and pallbearers of major importance, but Arthur Schomburg delivered a eulogy in which he said, with great historical perspective and knowing how immensely popular and important Harrison was in his day, Schomburg stated simply, in words that inspired the writing of the biography, that he came ahead of his time. And it's with these words, Schomburg highlights Harrison's importance for current and future generations and helped to stimulate this 2-volume biography. So that's some opening comments, if you will. We there? Dale, unmute. Dean, excuse me.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Very, very incisive, wonderful words from you. I would like to tell you that as far as I know, having lived in Boston for 40 years, I'm not quite, I'm still from away, but that it's Faneuil Hall.
Faneuil.
And I'll tell you that as to let you know that there's a move afoot to rename Faneuil Hall, because Faneuil Hall was a slave auction block, basically. And there has been a lot of action towards changing the name, and also there was a lot of sentiment towards building a monument right at Faneuil Hall that was to the horrors of slavery. There was an artist contracted, and a long process. This artist, I don't remember exactly all the details, but backed out at the last minute. So it's a difficult thing getting controversial public art in place. But there was no problem in getting in place right next to Faneuil Hall an enormous Holocaust memorial.
Yeah, right.
That's the other Holocaust.
Well, one thing before you go on, because I want to hear
Go ahead, Jeff.
your remaining comments. I think I used to refer to it as Faneuil Hall, but I wanted to prep before today's session, so I went online, pronunciation, and the first one that came up is Faneuil, rhymes with panel, and the second one was Faneuil. So I said, gee, is this changed? There's a new, but I appreciate your helping me on that.
Maybe we got to go around all the neighborhoods and take a poll to find out which is the definitive. So anyway, this is the moment that we, before we have Tim step up to the microphone, that we show you this beautiful Ugandan basket, which I bought a year ago at a holiday craft fair, when they were still having holiday craft fairs, and we will again. And it's as a way to tell you to send a check to Community Church. The address is in the chat, or else go online and give us a credit card or a PayPal. And the tiniest amount or the greatest amount is great. Like, you could even fill this huge basket, which I bought for about $10 at a thrift store. It's just as beautiful. So according to your means, that's my way to say, help us make this thing work. We are so proud to be to have for 100 years be hosting incredible speakers of social significance on a Sunday morning platform, and we look forward to the next 100 years just as we did. I'm sticking my own check in the basket, and I hope you will all do the same. And we will welcome back Tim Blest, and I hope, Tim, that you will get to tell us a little bit about your association with Dream Corps and Love Army and Van Jones, and give us another song, after which we'll have a conversation with Jeff.
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you, Jeff. That was quite fascinating to hear about Hubert Harrison. I had not been familiar with such an amazing, prolific writer and revolutionary, if you will. So thank you so much. Yes, I've had the pleasure of working for an organization for the past several years called Dream Corps, first in the capacity of Love Army, and years ago as a fellow for Green for All. Dream Corps is based out of Oakland. I serve as the arts and culture organizer there, and it's really powerful. It has a number of initiatives, including prison reform, including environmental justice, and tech for folks who have been historically left out of the tech industry, predominantly Black and brown folks and folks who don't have the resources. So yeah, it's always a great place to work in. If you check them out, it's called dreamcorps.us, like corpse, but obviously pronounced core, Dream Corps. Fascinating place. Like many of you all doing great work in this world. I'm one of those people that believe the world is a biological being, and We're the white blood cells, if you will. There's a lot of viruses and a lot of cancerous ideas like racism and all the other isms out there, but we do the work, and music is part of that healing. So I'm gonna get into this song right here. It's called Young Americans, and it goes out to each and every one of y'all, because there's been some people who've been trying to redefine America or create this other America. And I say, we have to stand up. Yeah. Listen, we the Americans we've been waiting for. We don't want more war. We want peace, love, and universal law, universal health care, and corporate welfare. Reparations for those enslaved. Hell yeah, no fracking nowhere. Strength of the black bear. First Nation heritage, Confederate flag axe here. Klan gets unmasked here. Trump's toupee snatch here. Make America hate again? That's so last year. Of course, all lives matter. Why Black Lives Matter less? Put cameras on all your vests so we can watch you and all the rest. Do the right thing and they won't be massive protests. We vote yes. Free state college, fossil fuels abolished. Stop deceiving the people, teach them real knowledge. That's how we gain wealth and maintain health. Stop working for someone else and work for yourselves like this. This, like this, like this. Pump your fists like this, like this, like this. Pump your fists like this, like this, like this. Pump your fists like this, like this, like this. Yeah. Uh-huh. For all the freedom fighters. Yeah, trying to get freedom. To my brave people. Yeah. So what you telling me? I ain't got a right to be me. I ain't got a right to be happy, a right to be free. I ain't got a right to choose if and when to have a family, a right to marry, a right to equal salary. And what you spraying in our skies though? I see those planes flying high, geoengineering so we die slow. Mass incarcerating the people, the new Jim Crow. We active, not cynical, saying no to GMO. We say yes to social justice or social unrest. We'll take over your Oval Office. We want to be prosperous, not just the 1%. But the populace hack your banks. Where's Anonymous? We honor this commitment to Mother Earth. Stand with Standing Rock until I'm laying in the dirt. We don't discriminate against any religion, whether Muslim or Christian, Buddhism or Hinduism. Listen, pump your fists like this, like this. Yeah, pump your fists like this, like this. Come on. Young Americans, to all the young Americans out there, right? We know that youth is in the heart and in the mind. We need new ideas. And bring back some of the great ideas that maybe had the system tried to kill, but we'll resurrect them, right? Yeah. Uh-huh. Power to the people. We vote yes. Yeah. Let's remember not to become what we're fighting against. That's one of the biggest challenges out there, because we know how we fight is the fight. We choose the mic, we choose the music, we choose art. We choose to always be grounded in love, because love is at the heart of every revolutionary. Thank you once again.
Templest, let's all hear it for Templest. Oh yeah, power.
Yes, I.
Oh yeah.
Power to the people. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim.
You're welcome.
It's always just a treat to have you. And you made me think about a program that's coming up in 2 weeks. And that program is called January 31st, Trabajo Cultural para Nuestra Liberación, Cultural Work for Our Liberation. And the presenter is the young Day Hernandez. She is an architect by trade, but also most known for being a bicultural worker and artist. And she's at the head of the leadership of a group that's called Agitarte. And they have a lot of activity in Boston and in Puerto Rico. So that's January 31st. Of course, next Sunday, Donald Lothrop it will be a blessed memory. I shouldn't say that, I never met him, but I've certainly seen his imprint on this church. That's next Sunday, and then De Hernandez after that. Cray Novick, Wednesday the 27th, filmmaker on Cuba. So all kinds of great stuff coming up here. And I want to invite you all to go to our YouTube channel. Everything we're doing is stored there, including the two events in December. Chris Hayes, a recording that's gotten 50,000 views. Whoa! Where did that come from? And also Daniel Ellsberg, to whom we gave our annual Sacco and Vanzetti Award. I want to just pay tribute to Jeff, who, this is amazing to me, worked as a postal worker and is also this fabulous intellectual and academic and researcher and deep into the archives of all kinds of places learning about this. We had just recently the sad passing of a member of our church who was named Bob Datilio, who was sort of the same thing. He was a stage manager at Sanders Theater and also a manager of several different orchestras around, but he had this passion for Sacco and Vanzetti and devoted his life to researching Sacco and Vanzetti. And you know, I think of other workers who do the same thing. Jeff Klein is a Boston area guy who's a retired machinist and does just phenomenal work on the history of the Middle East and the history of Zionism. It's just like, my hat is off to all of the likes of you, Jeff. And let's just open it to maybe back to you and to talk about the post office a little more. We have in our midst at least one retired postal worker, and also in me you have a incredible longtime fanatic of the Postal Service. I collect every commemorative that's ever come out and have them in binder after binder after binder. And we went out and stood out in front of the post office when those travesties were happened from that DeJoy guy. And I just wonder if you could envision for me a post office that was, you know, a multicultural or a cultural center that was also like a Staples stationary place and a center for a shared workspace and a retailing space and a bank. Imagine that. Just can you riff on that a little bit for me, Jeff?
Well, there used to be postal banks, you know, all over, and
I didn't know that.
Yes, and so there's some people who are still pushing for it today. And I think the Postal Service could do many of the functions you're talking about because they're basically in every town and city in the country, right? And it could be and Harrison considered the Postal Service one of the forms approaching socialism in the US when he was writing way back, you know, because it had such potential. But I want to give you a little history of that, my experience in the post office. But one thing before I get there, on the chat section, somebody said, make sure I tell people how to get these books. And I just want to say it now because not everybody might read the chat. And you can get these books if you go to the webpage of Columbia University Press, easy enough to find, and you put in Hubert Harrison, the two books will come up. Each one has a different page. And you can get the books for a 20% discount using a special code CUP20. And I encourage people to do that for themselves, but also this is a special request. Please try to get the Harrison biography, both volumes, in all your public and college and university libraries. That doesn't really cost you a thing, and we can get the book out there where people can have access. It's a way I think we can really spread the word about this giant of Black and Caribbean and radical history. Now, my own experience, my family's roots are entirely working class. I don't think no one ever went to college, and I'm not sure if anyone ever finished high school. I've never been able to find one who did. But I got to go to college, and I traveled. I faced a draft, and I did draft resistance work up in Boston, of all places. With the Boston Draft Resistance Group way back, late '60s, early '70s, and we broke the pencils and refused to take the test and face the consequences. And we had a group. It was nicely organized. There were some good people active up there. And I traveled throughout the Americas with no money, $300 or $400 for 5 or 6 months, and learned a lot, and came back, visited Cuba. And at a certain point, and then I did work in the Puerto Rican community, where I had very many close friends, and people I lived with. And then I decided, I started getting influenced by Alan and his work on the centrality of the struggle against white supremacy. And I came to the conclusion I really should go into the workplace and try and do organizing. So I went into the Bulk Mail Center in Jersey City, New Jersey, which was a facility of 4,000 workers. And over the next 23 years, I wrote over 500 articles. So it's not just that I focused on Harrison over all these years or on Allen. I also did my own writings on history and in the Postal Service, lots of writings. And over the years, I also was a soccer dad, some of the things people do. My daughter went to Smith, so I've got all these Massachusetts connections. So I went into the post office, and starting essentially from scratch, tried to build work with the understanding that the struggle against white supremacy was central for workers to start making progress in this situation. And I was a member primarily of the Mail Handlers Union. A lot of people don't know. A brief history is, in 1970, there was a major postal strike that was keyed in the inner cities of New York and Chicago. In Chicago, there was perhaps 75, 80% Black and Latin workers. In New York, perhaps 70%. And it was a period of militancy coming out of the 60s, both in the Black movement and Latino movement, and in the left and the youth movement, the anti-war movement. And when those strikes were wildcats at first, right? And Business Week ran 28 pages because Wall Street couldn't run. Back then, there was no internet, and they couldn't get their paper to run. And they went right after Nixon, who was the president, and he caught hell. So the higher ups quickly moved to do certain things. And they set up a board of governors that would be like an intermediary. So the president would have somebody to blame if there was problems with the post office. They recognized certain unions. They recognized the letter carriers, the American Postal Workers Union, which is nominally a multi-craft union, the rural letter carriers, and the mail handlers, the union I was primarily involved with because I was a mail handler. And what people don't know is that the mail handlers, and the mail handlers was taken over in the late 60s, early 70s by Laborers International Union of North America, a union which had key ties up in New England, right? And in 1986, Department of Justice reported that it was one of 4 major organized crime dominated unions in the country. And LIUNA came into the Mail Handlers Union primarily because they wanted control of the mail handler benefit plan, health benefit plan, which was the second biggest in the public sector behind Blue Cross Blue Shield. And one reason it had so much appeal, it was the cheapest, right? So people, low paid workers in the federal government could get it. And so those unions, but another thing that the Postal Service did is they built a hubs and spokes system in which they set up 21 new facilities around the countries, essentially named after major cities, where they would process bulk mail. The one I worked at, the Bulk Mail Center, was 10 miles from Harlem, 10 miles from Newark, 12 miles from Bed-Stuy. But the workforce makeup changed from maybe 60, 65% in New York City to 20% Black and Latin in Jersey City. In Chicago, went from 75% down to 20%. And in the facility they built in Cicero and Cairo. The Boston facility was named, it was placed out in Springfield, Mass, so it wasn't so close to the inner city. But they built these hubs and spokes all around the country. And as you go through the documents, because I went and researched this, you would see in some of the testimony, congressional testimony, we got to go back to those workers we used to have, you know, those peaceful workers, those essentially what, there was a conscious plan on their part to build these centers. So I was working in this type of a facility, and we started from scratch, and we started doing, and I write about this, and on my webpage, which is www.jeffreybperry.net, on the very first page, there's lots of things all over that on the side up front, but I have several articles on how we undertook work in the post office fighting against white supremacy. There's also a video on regarding the strike we got involved in 1978. But and what we did is everything we did, we were trying to look at from the perspective of what's in the interest of our workers here, but is it challenging white supremacy also? And how if it's not, how can we? How should it be? And we did simple things and more complex things. For instance, in the post office back then, payday was every 2 weeks on a Thursday. So we made sure our news bulletin, which was done on leaflets in that era, came out every Thursday, because that was payday and you had a guarantee you'd get the most people there. And we put out our news bulletin. We set up committees, grievance committee, light duty committees, women's committees, health and safety committees. And we tried to make sure that the leadership of many of those committees, the majority, were people of color and increasingly women. And we tried to do that. And again, so we focused everything we did. In 1986, out of our workplace of 4,000 workers, we actually co-coordinated the statewide anti-apartheid march in New Jersey, which was held in Jersey City. And in that period, we had in my facility 3,000 out of 4,000 workers. And it's still largely polarized area, you know, in Jersey City, it's like sections of Brooklyn and the like. 3 out of 4,000 workers wearing anti-apartheid buttons, including a lot of the European American workers who never in their life believed they'd be wearing an anti-apartheid button. So it showed to me this work can be undertaken. Then we started to take it to the local level, and I started editing the local newspaper. And then I was asked to edit the national paper. We had a very progressive Black national president get elected. And he swung into office, and he had some, you know, very bold plans. But LIUNA, the union I mentioned, quickly placed 2 demands on him. One, that he turn over control of the mail handler benefit plan, which was a big piggy bank for them, I think 20 million a year. And 2, that he fire me as editor of the national publications. He refused on both counts, and they quickly came after him and had him removed. It was a great loss to the union. But I continued working the union for quite a number of years, mostly focusing then at the local level, where I was a treasurer and editor. And it was a tri-state local. We went into New York State, New Jersey, and New York State, New Jersey, and down. Did we go to Pennsylvania? I'm not sure. I get maybe New York, New Jersey. That's where we covered. And so I did all that work, and I, based on my experience, which I tried to write up, I think it's very possible to undertake work amongst working people that places the fight against white supremacy as central in the context of the class struggle. And I say that because, one, there's a lot of groups on the left, if you will, groups that, you know, I like the people in them and stuff like that. But when you look at their list or their programmatic objectives, they'll list 6, 7, 8 things. You go down the list, and finally, number 7, you'll see we oppose racism or something like that. I think it's got to be placed up number 1. I think it's the key to how we're going to make progress in this country. So I tried to stick with that approach, and I think it's possible based on my experience. And I think people, have to, learn some of these lessons. I try and share them. And originally I placed hundreds of documents. You talked about boxes of papers. I originally placed, besides placing Harrison's papers at Columbia and Allen's papers at Amherst, I placed hundreds of boxes of my postal stuff at Emory University in Atlanta. And then this same union, which I had fought tooth and nail with, I had been fired by management, I've been fired by the union over the years. They came and they put one of their lawyers on me and said, we believe all these papers are ours. They never looked at one document, they hadn't seen one, and they just made this out through their lawyer. They made this outlandish claim. And but as an individual, you kind of, what do you do in this situation? So I wound up talking to friends, and I got an attorney, Paul Levy from Public Citizen, that's Nader's group in Washington, D.C. And he said, Jeff, let me run with this for a while. And he was able to start talking with their lawyer. They've kind of backed off a little bit for the present. And in the interim, I've started placing a lot of my writings and a lot of the documents from the public domain, et cetera, at U-Mass Amherst also. So besides Du Bois, and recently, as you mentioned, the collection that they recently got, I have my papers. But then I then spoke to some friends, and this should be of interest to your Boston audience too. I've been close friends with a backcourt partner of mine in college, a friend named Gene Bruskin, who was president of the Boston school bus drivers during the strike way back, and has been in the labor movement ever since. And Gene placed his papers up in UMass Amherst. And then he was very good friends with a fellow named Rand Wilson, who's another Boston activist. And Rand placed his papers up at UMass Amherst. And then recently they got Peter Olney, who runs who was involved with a labor education center in the Bay Area in California. And he placed his papers there. The big collection that I briefly referred to was Ellsberg's paper, were the ones they got recently, major collection. So UMass Amherst is really doing a wonderful job in acquiring collections. I'm sure it's easy, it's somewhat easy for folks from Boston to get out there. This is a difficult period. And unfortunately, Rob Cox, who was the head of their collections for a number of years, passed away within the past year. They now have a very competent person, Aaron Rubenstein, who's in charge. But Rob Cox's loss was a great one. But there's some wonderful resources up there in Massachusetts I want to call to your attention. Sorry. And if people want to do research on the post office, there's going to be lots more material there too. They're starting to digitize and put it up in inventory.
If there are folks who would like to ask a question, you can either leave it in the chat, or Charlie informs me that he messaged some questions from our YouTube channel to you, Jeff. But we can also do it just straight from the people that we have here. If you want to make yourself visible on video and raise your hand, we can call your name and let's see.
By the way, my email address, anybody wants to contact me personally, is jeffreybperry@gmail.com. JEFFREYB Perry @gmail.com. And I see one of these questions, but you have a question you want to ask? I see one about some articles, and I haven't gone to the book to look, but I believe the articles listed there on page 227 and 228 of the Harrison second volume, where he gave talks, are The Nature of Religion, The Roots of Religion, A Study of Primitive Psychology, The Manufacture of Gods, and especially A Defense of Atheism. I just had, as I recall, the flyer or the listing for those talks, but I've not located any copies of his notes on those talks or any coverage of those talks.
I wanted to also point out to folks that there is an announcement in the chat from someone named YH Pat, and it's about something called an inquiry into racist policing, and there's a Zoom link that is posted there. I looked that up, and it's called the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. And so if you're interested in that symposium, the website is there. While I'm at it, I'd love to tell you about Mass Peace Action, which has its conference this weekend. Quite a long list of really amazing presenters. MAPA is what they're called around Facebook, or Mass Peace Action, right here in town. Wonderful sister organization of ours here at Community Church. Let's see, I'm gonna keep looking for questions. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, two more things, and I think then Charlie might have something to say, but let me just get these two things out quickly. On my webpage, if you search around, I'm not on the webpage right now, you'll find, I think it's a very interesting video on Hubert Harrison that was done at the Dudley Public Library in back some years, but wonderful job of filming, and we had some good audience participation, and it's not too long. I think, as I recall, it's about an hour, so people want to just get a little video. And that presentation has slides, which you were asking about before. If we have some slides, it has some very nice slides. The second thing I just want to mention, because I had started to mention before we went on the air, is Harrison's grandson. Harrison dies in 27. But his grandson is named Ray Richardson. And I wrote an article on Ray Richardson, which was published in Black Agenda Report, the newspaper of Margaret Kimberly and Glenn Ford, and several other places, after Malcolm X's son was found dead in Mexico about a decade ago. And it was about Ray Richardson, who was in the, at Boston University, a film major, and he and Stan Lathan of Sesame Street fame, etc. He's still a noted producer, a media film producer, were graduate students. And after Martin Luther King was assassinated, the local public broadcasting station, GBH, is it? GBH?
Yeah.
Yep. They were looking for some Black programming. So they went into the grad school and they asked these two guys to come out and do a show. And they started a show which was called Say Brother, or they quickly became in charge of it, Say Brother, which ran for a number of years and now has changed its name, as someone has pointed out. But when they started it in 1968, that was before even Gil Noble's show in New York, which I grew up with, right? And it was a wonderful show. It ran Thursday nights for an hour prime time and was repeated on the weekend. And they had politics, cultural entertainment, speakers, guests, and a portion of or little snippets from the show is available on the Vault, or whatever they're calling it now, because I was able to access it some years ago. And things from Ray Richardson interviewing people to Parliament Funkadelic. I mean, it's great stuff. And they had a tremendous show. And then in 1970, New Bedford, Mass erupts in response to some incidents. And Ray Richardson brings the TV crew out for 6 days to New Bedford. And this isn't the journalism you see today. This was people journalism, where they put the mics in front of the community and let the people have a voice. And GBH didn't know what to do with it, and their sponsors, and they said, we can't do this. And within a short period, the show was taken off the air for a period of time, and Richardson was removed as director. And so he was, shortly thereafter, went down to Mexico, visited his father, who had been in the service and left the States after World War II because he didn't want to deal with the racism anymore. Set up a little club in Mexico. And they went down to Mexico and then went to the coast. And he and his fiance / wife, it's not clear what their relationship were, died allegedly of drowning in the Gulf of Mexico, not in the Gulf of Mexico, on the other coast, around around January 25th, 1971. Now, when I started trying to research that, I got some old issues of the Boston Globe, and on the same day that his obituary appeared the obituary of the former president of Guatemala, who also died in Mexico right around the same day, allegedly drowning in Mexico, but his case was in his own bathtub. And all of this led to a lot of suspicion because this is a period when the US government was intervening in various places domestically and internationally and offering political leaders. So I wrote this piece on Ray Richardson, which has lots of ties to Boston activists way back in the late 60s, early 70s, people involved with the show. Kay Bourne from the Bay State Banner helped locate some materials. And people might want to know about that. They can look it up simply online. Ray Richardson, it's on various publications, but Black Agenda Report would be one, or under my name, Ray Richardson and Jeffrey B. Perry. Sorry. Now, Charlie.
I just looked up the Guatemalan former president that you referenced, and it's Jacobo Arbenz, who was
right.
The one who was.
You get old, you forget.
Who was ousted in 1954 by the U.S. coup orchestrated by the Dulles brothers.
Right, and he went to Cuba and then to Mexico. Excellent, thank you. Jacobo Arbenz, yeah.
Yeah, there's a beautiful book written by another presenter friend of ours, who is Stephen Kinzer. The book is called Bitter Fruit, and it's all about that coup. He also wrote another one about the Iran coup that happened right at the same time, Mossadegh.
Yep.
Charlie, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No problem. This is just another question from YouTube. Greg Glamada was asking about Harrison's involvement in there was a movement to get U.S. citizenship for people from the U.S. Virgin Islands, and asking you, what do you know about that?
Sure. Yes, he was involved, and in the book, I go into some detail on a situation between the Virgin Islands, which the U.S. Was passed over to the U.S. in 1917. They've got some fancy words for it, but the U.S. took it over in 1917 because it was on the verge of World War I. The U.S. was looking for some places is one factor, and two, there was a labor movement growing in St. Croix that was led by Harrison's boyhood friend, D. Hamilton Jackson, who grew to some prominence in the islands. And the plantation elite, the ruling elite, couldn't control that very well anymore. So they were looking for Southern US style leadership in their labor situation. And Harrison maintained ties throughout his years with people both in the Virgin Islands and Virgin Islanders in the US. And I just spoke a day or two ago in St. Croix on this, and I went through a list of names of people because I know for a fact, because I've spoken many times in St. Croix, that people are very interested to hear the names of their ancestors or relatives or people they know. So I made it a point in the book to, wherever I could, list some of these names. But Harrison was very involved in the struggle for citizenship for Virgin Islanders. When he first came, and even after the US takes over the Virgin Islands, it was said that Virgin Islanders were citizens in, but not of, the United States. And Harrison didn't even know what that meant. When he's facing the draft in World War I, and they ask citizenship, he didn't know what to put, And at various points, he was listed as a citizen or a non-citizen on documents, but he didn't have citizenship until 1922. And when he gets citizenship in 1922, and his copies of his citizenship papers in volume 2. I put it in there. One of the striking features about the document, and here's a picture of Harrison. See, he's a very dark-skinned man, was he's listed as white. And that was, the speculation went from Rogers, J. Rogers and others, because they just assumed Virgin Islanders seeking citizenship would be of European descent, not of African descent. But I mean, it's a bit more detailed, the whole story, and I don't want to garble it here, but I think I do a fairly good job in the book. But I also am in touch with a Virgin Island activist who's still, and they're using some of the documents I've now put in the book to go back and look at all the details of how the US took over and ran the Virgin Islands, because particularly in those early years, they ran it under naval leadership, US naval leadership. And Harrison refers to it as Southernism run riot. And there were attacks on the civilian community, attacks on Virgin Island women, you know, a host of things like that. And Harrison tried to get people, particularly Virgin Islanders in the US and others, to petition. He supported the activist leaders when they came to the States or went elsewhere, you know, passing through the States to go speak on behalf of Virgin Island citizens and rights. So there's a considerable amount of material in volume 2 on that. And I think you'll find it of interest. Yeah.
Our friend Victor Wallace has a question. Go ahead and unmute, Victor.
Jeff, it's very good to see you, and I congratulate you for all your work. This is
hi, Victor. Good to hear your voice. I want to see your picture. Let me find your picture. 1 second.
Yeah. My main question is just how you account for the fact that Hubert Harrison has been so little known up until you've put him on the map, so to speak. Why wasn't his name celebrated, let's say, along with other activists in a similar line? That's a big question, I think, and I'm sure you've addressed it, but I'd be interested to hear. The other question, I don't know if you'd want to go into any detail about it, but I'm really interested in this depository of papers at UMass, and I wonder if there's any general comments you could make about it, how it's, what its name is, and what's the range of things that it welcomes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let me do the first one, and if my memory fails me on the second, just remind me what it is. Yep. But I've got some basic notes, and then I want to elaborate on them a little bit. Just things I don't want to forget. Well, okay, Harrison was not better known for a host of reasons, and let me see if I can find this quickly. Just because there's about 7 or 8 basic ones that I like to make sure I mention, but then there's other ones I want to get into. Okay, Harrison was poor, he was working class, he was Black, he was foreign born, and he was from the Caribbean. And if he was a woman, I would add that. And these are all groups that have been, you know, consistently underrepresented in the historical literature, et cetera. So those are some factors. But then, in addition, he was a radical, a real radical on class, race, and religion. He was he was a pioneer Black freethinker, and for many years, and the Black church was the most powerful institution in the Black community. So that was another factor. Also, Harrison was a forthright critic. When Harrison came to the US, and even before he starts in the post office, he starts getting involved in Black working class intellectual circles. And they were at St. Benedict the Moor Roman Catholic Church on West 53rd Street, and another church on West 53rd Street. And this is before the IRT train got completed to go up to Harlem, and the major area of Black residency in Manhattan was in the area where Harrison lived at that time, around West 63rd Street. So it'd come down to 53rd Street. And St. Benedict de Moor held lyceums. And in these lyceums, they were weekly meetings. And there'd be people like Arthur Schomburg and Johnny Bruce and Charles Burroughs, who's another postal worker with Harrison, and Williana Jones Burroughs. Charles Burroughs, by the way, and Williana, their son and his wife helped found the DuSable Museum in Chicago. And Charles Burroughs was an actor and also, as I said, a postal worker. And he would be with Harrison in these study groups that they ran after the midnight shift. They get off at 11 or 12 in the evening, and then they'd have a study group, a group of them in somebody's apartment. But at these lyceums, the atmosphere was wonderfully exhilarating because they'd bring speakers, or some of them would speak, and then they'd have freewheeling discussion and criticism. But they would remain friends, and they'd go out and have a drink or, a cup of coffee. It's the type of intellectual atmosphere that I personally think we need more of today. And but Harrison was reared on this. And so he, from early on, learned to speak freely and openly his views and his criticisms. So that's another factor. He had no long-lasting organizational ties. Unlike, say, Du Bois, who gets picked up by the Communist Party after being with the NAACP for many years, or Garvey, who has the UNIA, or Randolph, who has the Socialist Party and then gets picked up later in the labor movement. Harrison had no long-lasting organizational ties, so he didn't have that organization to keep his memory alive. Another factor was he dies young at age 44, and he doesn't live, and he's not martyred like Malcolm and Martin, and he doesn't live that long life, say that Du Bois did. But another one, and on this one, if you really want to get into this, but I'll tell you where you can find it, is got to do with how history is written. And this is one of the profound ones that I've suggested at, and I really look for others to start picking up. But I'm going to give a little background story on this. Around 2010, 2011, I was asked by an editor working for Daedalus magazine, which is out of Cambridge, Mass. It's the journal of the American Academy of the Arts and Science, if I would want to do an article for their forthcoming issue on race, because by 2042, it was projected that the US would be a majority non-white country. I have to say I was a little shocked that they wrote to me, because that's the American Academy of Arts and Science, and I'm an independent scholar, right? And so I said, sure. And then I tried to figure out what did they want me to write about. And what I wrote about mostly was Harrison and Allen. So I put together an article on Harrison and Allen and the centrality of the struggle against white supremacy. And that article was 2,500 words, which is what they had asked for. And they had told me, keep it to about 2,500 words, and you are free to write on anything that you want. I said, wow. So I did it. And I sent it out to the editor, who was at Washington University in St. Louis. And he wrote back and says, this is great. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. This is great. Would you mind doubling it? And I was shocked. So yeah, wait till you hear what happens though. So I doubled it. And he wrote back, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And so I'm saying, boy, I can't wait to see this. And then for 3 quarters in a row, on the back cover of Daedalus, around in 2011, I think it was, my article on Hubert Harrison and Theodore W. Allen, the developing conjuncture and insights from Hubert Harrison and Theodore W. Allen on the centrality of the struggle against white supremacy, something along those lines. You can see what it grew into on my webpage. It's top left, and there's an addendum which elaborates on what I'm saying right now. but it appeared for 3 months in a row. But then when the journal came out, it didn't appear because I was looking for it every day. And I wrote to the editor in St. Louis, and he waited, I think, maybe I wrote to the editor in Cambridge, the managing editor, and then I wrote to the editor there. But I guess they had to get their story straight because they came back and gave me this. They said, "Oh, we thought we notified you back in November," which is totally untrue. And they included what was purported to be a land mail letter that they sent to me. Now, none of my correspondence was by land mail, and I talked to 3 or 4 other people who submitted letters, who submitted articles. No communication was by land mail; it was all email. And then the editor also said, "Well, it was decided not to use your article because it was too long." They told me to double it, and it did not fit. They told me to write on whatever I wanted, and they said it was great both times. And what they put in its place were 2 things. One, an article that they had published maybe 15 or 20 years earlier. Usually a journal doesn't do that, republish an article. And second, an article by somebody who was from whatever the title was back then, the Du Bois Institute, where Henry Louis Gates is in charge. So that was what came to me. And they purported to tell me that they had sent this to me by land mail, which I don't believe because I never got any land mail. But taking this a little deeper, if you still want to hear where this goes, I tried to think what had happened in the period. And in the period before it was pulled, I had been up in Massachusetts again, and I had spoken at Harvard as a guest of Henry Louis Gates at the Du Bois Institute. And while I'm speaking there, I was speaking on Harrison, I opened up with a slide, which I show oftentimes when I do my presentations. Let me see if I have it here for you. You'll see how innocuous it is. Yeah, this one. Let me find it and you can see it. I opened up with this slide, if people can see this. Can you see that from Joel A. Rogers?
Yeah.
Okay. Said Harrison was perhaps the foremost Afro-American intellect of his time. I was promptly interrupted by Gates, and he said, and I'm saying this because it took me 1.5 years or 2 years to get a copy of the tape from Widener Library. I'd gone to Harvard for a while too in my travels, so I knew how to, research things. And when I got the tape, it confirmed what I remembered. And Gates interrupted me, and he says, "Jeff, J.A. Rogers is a joke as a historian." And I was flabbergasted because I consider Rogers, his book, World's Great Men of Color, which has gone through about 7 reprint editions, 2 volumes sometimes. If you can see this one, that's one of the versions. Outstanding historian, lay historian, friend of Harrison. And I think his piece on Harrison is one of the very best I've read. He really helped me along the way. And I was shocked. And I said, well, no, I actually think Rogers is a good historian, and his writings on Harrison are superb, are excellent. And then 30 seconds later, approximately 30 seconds later, Gates interrupts again, and he says, he goes, "Rogers is a joke as a historian. He sees white blood in all these people of Negro ancestry." I was just flabbergasted. But now, step back another step. Within another year or 2 after that, Henry Louis Gates, who publishes theroot.com, which is out of Massachusetts, I believe, started a series entitled 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro. That's based on a book by J.A. Rogers of that title, which I have right over there someplace. And I don't think that Gates does all his own writing, but he, in that, he opens up with saying, since my freshman year in college, I've been a great fan of J.A. Rogers. And I read that, I shook my head. And then within another year or 2, he starts this thing on TV which ties into Ancestry.com, where he's got all these guests and everyone checking their DNA, etc. And he's pointing out to these people their African ancestry and the like. If I said white blood, I meant Gates was accusing Rogers of finding African blood in so many people of European ancestry. So there was that was another part of the story. Then there is this part of the story. Gates made his rise to academic heights by writing an article entitled "The Trope of the New Negro" in 1986 when he was at Yale. And it's, I think, 37 pages, so it doesn't mention Hubert Harrison once. I've elaborated some on Hubert Harrison's central role in the history of the New Negro movement, the militant New Negro. And my advisor at Columbia, one of my two advisors, I had Hollis Lynch and I had Nathan Huggins, who had left Columbia to found what was the Du Bois Institute, but he unfortunately passed away, and then Gates followed him in that position. So he writes that article in 1986, and then he comes out with this publication, and he came out with a later book in Upon These Shores in, I think, 2012, which barely mentions Harrison. But in this book on the New Negro, he tries to pull from Harrison some articles, realizing he hadn't included Harrison very much. And I wrote a footnote in this book, which I did, When Africa Awakes, the Inside Story of the Stirrings and Strivings of the New Negro in the Western World. And that's for Diasporic Africa Press. It's an updated version. And in this book, I quote from, I might be able to find it quickly, otherwise I'll just go from memory here. Let's see. Okay. Let me read this. For example, Henry Lewis Jr. makes no mention of Harrison in his major article, The Trope of the New Negro, it was 1988, or in his book, Life Upon These Shores, looking at African-American history, which seeks to look at the full sweep of African-American history. Then Gates's book, The New Negro, Readings on Race, Representation, and African-American Culture, 1892 to 1938, Princeton University Press, 2007. That's this book. Let me just go on here. Edited by Gates and Andrew Jarrett, reprints a number of Harrison's articles without including acknowledgement of their sources in the list of acknowledgements on pages 11 and 12, Roman numerals. The introduction in the book mentions Harrison briefly on page 8 and does not discuss the significance of the pioneering 1917 to 1919 contributions to the New Negro movement. The book on page 10 on page puts under a 1920 heading 2 1917 Negro articles. So he's listing 1917 articles as 1920. It puts it offers no date for another 1917 article, and it incorrectly identifies a 1920 article as from 1923. There's about 7 articles that he misdates and dates much later than when they were written and published, all of which, of course, I think takes away from the primacy of Harrison in doing this. And then he also goes on to say that it was, he implies that it was Du Bois's political warrior mentality related to the war that resonated with Harrison. And in fact, as I indicated earlier in what I said, it was Harrison's response to Du Bois's Closed Ranks editorial, which generated a lot of his additional work. In other words, he was very opposed to Du Bois. So now you have a situation where Gates has, and Gates is on the board, by the way, of Daedalus. So I'm piecing together, he was probably very much involved in what went on. And this gets at the deeper problem I'm getting at, because what I found is when I first went to publish Harrison, I finished my dissertation in 1986, 800 and some odd pages, dissertation at Columbia, while working in the post office. And I had a contract with LSU Press, but when I went to them, they didn't know what to do with it. It got outstanding reviews by the peer review readers, but it was 800 some pages, and they didn't know who I was and who Harrison was, and they wanted me to shut it down completely, and they didn't want me to turn it into a 2-volume biography. And I said, no, he merits a 2-volume biography. So I went on for a decade more with this, and we tried every round. We did the peer review. It was wonderful. Then I spoke with a friend of mine, Winston James, who a historian at Columbia then, now at UCal Irvine, and he suggested I go speak with his editor at Columbia University Press, a fellow named Peter Dimmock. And I knew Dimmock was important when I sat down and had lunch with him. He had been a former student of Morgan at Yale, who was president of the American Historians Association and or organization, American Historians, I forget, maybe both. And specialized in a lot of 17th century stuff. And Allen had written a critique of Morgan in Monthly Review back in 1978, I believe. And as we're sitting down, Dimmock says to me, Jeff, I've been a fan of Allen's since he wrote that review of Morgan. And most people don't know about that. I mean, it's stunning because Allen's very insightful in what he says. And then he goes, what else? Talk to me about what else he does. So then I told him about Harrison. And he said, well, we couldn't talk to you officially if you're under contract with LSU. So I went and broke the contract with LSU, and I went with Columbia. But in the course of the meeting with Dimmock, he said to me, Jeff, 2 things. You should know that 95% of the historians out there don't know who Allen or Harrison are. And of those who do, 95% feel threatened by their work in terms of their own work. And if you extend that a little bit, and I've seen this, if you're a historian writing on the new Negro movement, as was Gates or something like that, and you've never mentioned Harrison, it is hard to come all of a sudden and say, this guy is brilliant, insightful, and things like that. And so many other aspects of this writing. And I see how the writings of the current faculty oftentimes get passed on to their grad students and the next generation and the next generation. But it's not always going to be that way. I think we can break out of that. And that's one reason why when I'm writing these books on Harrison, I try to make them as detailed and as meticulous as possible. I try to make them publicly available. That's why I'm urging people to get them into libraries, and lots of good footnotes, a couple of hundred footnotes in volume 2, maybe 130, 140 in volume 1, links to those footnotes. And I really believe that current and future generations will be able to take this and move this stuff further, to break beyond what has passed, what has been passed on. So I don't know if that helps a little, Victor. Oh, wait, you had a second question.
Fascinating.
One
about
more
U-Mass
question from Charlie.
Archive.
Oh, yeah, that was Charlie? Okay, excuse me.
Charlie. And then we'll call it a day. And
I'm sorry if I talk too long. And
hey,
don't worry about it. I know you've talked about you've talked about his influence on Garvey and Garvey's successors. But are you aware was Malcolm X directly aware of Harrison, and did he have any direct comments on him?
No, I do not believe he had any direct knowledge of him. And but other than his father was a Garveyite preacher and his mother was a reporter for the Negro World, which was a paper that Harrison had edited. So just in terms of the broad strands of those movements, perhaps impacted Malcolm, but I don't think he knew about, most people didn't know about Harrison. When I started out, the way I learned about Harrison was from writings by Rogers in his book, World's Great Men of Color, Richard B. Moore in an encyclopedia of the Negro Americans or American Left, and Philip Foner had a chapter on him in one of his books. And I said, who is this guy? Because Harrison, the picture that was painted was Harrison was arguing that racism was not innate. It was not in the interest of European American workers. These are key concepts. And I had set out to look and analyze why no socialism in the US. And I was familiar with all these left and labor groups from the turn of the century. I've been working very meticulously. I said, I got to find out who this guy is. So I went to the Schomburg Center. I printed out off microfilm his 2 books, When Africa Wakes, and his earlier book, The Negro and the Nation. And when I read them, I was blown away. And I said I had to start writing on him. That's when I wrote several chapters. I got in touch with his family, his children. I met with them on a 3rd visit. They brought me into the front room of their railroad flat in Harlem. And they said, here, take his papers and do with them what you need to do. They trusted me, so I wanted to do a real good job.
Could you give us a little bit of insight into his comments about Lincoln before you quit?
Yeah, wow. I got to go from memory, and I don't want to, but you got to read them. I mean, he talks about Lincoln being willing to tolerate slavery on the eve of, with his statements about on the eve of his inauguration, and earlier. He goes back to some 1857 addresses. During the war, he didn't treat the African-American soldiers equally, as you know, probably. And let me see if I could find some of his quotes. But it's a nice rundown of statements by Lincoln. And this is where, when you get old and your memory is not right there where you want it to be. If you bear with me for a minute.
While you do that, I want to say that if you want to hear more about that sort of thing, not only Lincoln, but every president, Margaret Kimberly has a great book. It's called Prejudential. And she goes through every single president and it talks about a kind of racist overtone and racist tendencies all the way through the history of the U.S. And she's going to be speaking here in February 28th.
Right. I will certainly be listening. Let me see if I can get this one, what I'm looking for now. Hold on.
And one more announcement while you're looking is that Lenny has reminded us that a lot of us are very fond of the MLK breakfast that happens in Watertown. Several of our members live in Watertown. This year it's virtual. And you can find out about it at the website of the group World in Watertown. It looks like they have, as usual, a wonderful lineup of speakers and music and awards that are given. So the 21st Annual Unity Breakfast in Watertown, go to the website worldinwatertown.org. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet.
Okay.
Wait, let me see. Let's see. Come on. Okay. Here's some of the quotes. To prove his charges, these are just some. Harrison detailed Lincoln's hypocrisy and quoted his words from the August 27th, 1858 Freeport, Illinois debate with Stephen A. Douglas, where Lincoln supported the fugitive slave law. I think under the Constitution of the United States, the people of the southern states are entitled to a congressional fugitive slave law. Most people are not aware of that. And opposed abolition of the domestic slave trade. As to the question of the abolition of the slave trade between the different states, I can truly answer as I have that I am pledged to do nothing about it. This is Lincoln. Harrison also cited Lincoln's August 14th, 1862 answer to a colored deputation in which he indicated support for colonization. First inaugural discussed the proposed 13th Amendment to which, then there was the whole question of the proposed 13th Amendment prohibiting federal intervention in slavery, to which Lincoln indicated he had no objection to its being made express and irrevocable. You hear that now, this is the 13th Amendment. And then also talks about that last question about express and irrevocable. Then there was also these questions of, there were some resolutions passed in Congress that Lincoln was referring to, and I go into detail, and if I can find them. But some of this stuff is around page 131, 130, 130 to 132 in the volume, if you can get a chance to get a look at it, even at the library. Sorry, I'm not more precise right now.
All right. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be in touch and join us on some of our upcoming events. And we're all ears to not only to you, but other people on this call for programming ideas for future Sundays. We're just really determined to turn this not only into a vibrant speaker series here in our auditorium, but take advantage of this Zooming thing that we're doing to turn it into a broadcast that goes out all over the place and picks up steam as it goes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Charlie, for your technical help. Jeffrey and Tim, who had to leave us. Dorothy Weitzman. I see that Alan Clemens from Maine is calling in. Lenny, retired postal worker. Shane from Brunswick. Alvin Foster, thank you for being with us. Barry Warner. Elcio, you're new to us. Be in touch and give us your email address. We'd be glad to be in touch with you. Homer Frank, so good to see you in the rectangle. Jim Casteris from New Hampshire, thank you. Jose Aleman from out in Central Mass, Ayer, Massachusetts. Kevin Devine and Victor Wallace, thank you all. Some have gone and more.
I wanted the code. I want that code for ordering your book.
CUP 20. It stands for Columbia University Press 20. You can get both volumes with that discount code.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Please, and also share that with your libraries, please.
Yes.
While we were speaking, a copy was ordered for Community Church of Boston's library, which we will get Jeff to sign as he did the first volume when he was last here. And we have an expanding library on issues and personages that we're really interested in, especially around race, but also Sacco and Vanzetti, the Rosenbergs, the regular speakers during the 80s like Chomsky and Zinn. We want to really develop that library. So that's it, folks.
Wait, one more thing.
One more thing, Jeff.
Victor, if you can, a review in Socialism and Democracy.
Socialism and Democracy.
Yeah, good to see you.
Whose new editor has his office in Community Church. That would be Søren Mudliar. Socialism and Democracy, whose new home is out of this very same building.
Okay.
It's a wonderful thing. A wonderful thing.
Great.
Gonna keep on walking forward.
Thank you all so very much.
Keep on walking forward. Keep on walking forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody. Take care.